Welcome to Lyme and Beyond with Tanya, where we talk all about Lyme and beyond, because as most of us know, Lyme rarely travels alone. I created this podcast to give you hope and to remind you that healing is possible because I healed from my 13-year journey. Although it was exhausting, physically, emotionally, financially, it truly was a blessing as it reshaped my mind, body, and soul. In this space, we have raw and real conversations with those who have made it to the other side of this journey, along with breaking down different topics with practitioners and different approaches. My goal is to make you feel less alone, more empowered, and confident in being your own advocate. So, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you're looking for more tips and resources, I share everything I learned along my journey on my Lyme and Beyond with Tanya Facebook page. So now let's get to today's guest. She is Nikki Schultek, and I'm so excited to have her because this is going to be jam-packed with all sorts of information. So her journey actually began in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and then she kind of took a little pivot in life and became a full-time mom. And that's when Lyme showed its face. So, we're going to talk about her own personal journey with Lyme. And then we're going to dive into some of the other stuff that she does. She is a researcher of chronic infection. And so, I really believe that this episode is going to be so full of hope because many of us think, we're sitting back on our own, sick. No one's helping us. No one's doing anything. But trust me when I say there is so much stuff going on behind the scenes that we are not maybe aware of. And so I want you to just, of all things, take hope away from this, knowing that people are fighting for us. They are sharing our voices. And Nikki today is going to talk all about that because she wears many, many hats, too many for me to even try to list them all. So we're going to dive right into her journey, and then I'll just have her kind of start wherever she wants to as far as it comes goes to the research. I know we're going to dive into Alzheimer's a little bit. Is there a correlation? So just so much is going to be packed into this time. So Nikki, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Welcome to the show.
Tanya, thank you so much for having me and for being vulnerable and sharing your story and also attempting to, provide something that is more valuable than any medicine or truly anything else is hope. You'll have to forgive my dog standing in the background in the perfect timing. Um,
I
but
love
but
it.
yeah, she's one of my office companions, my best pal. Really, for anyone listening, I just would like to open up with an intention, following Tanya on your incredible lead, is that what I hope you come away with is the feeling that this can pass, whatever pain, whatever difficulty you're having today, that there is indeed hope, that people care deeply and immensely, and that while we all have a different experience with our journey with chronic infection and Lyme specifically, that the people that have come through and are well enough, there are so many of us out trying to tell the story, and we know that not everyone feels well enough to do that. What I want you to know is that just the way that things are today isn't how they always have to be. And that with each passing day, there are innovations, there are researchers, there are clinicians, people working, and that there are ample resources out there. So today, as we go through my journey, I want to share some of those resources. I want to share that hope, though, most of all. And just to let you know that you are loved and cared about, and that even though you may not feel seen or heard, you are, and that there's powerful movement along these lines.
Well, that was a beautiful way to start it. Absolutely perfectly said. Because it is. It's a dark place when we go through this journey. And you know that personally, right? Because you had a journey
I
and we
do.
just we don't want to say not to have bad days. There's a lot of bad days, right? But try to find
Absolutely.
some gratitude. Gratitude is helps our nervous system, right? Like gratitude is so good. And so just always try to find something that you can do, right? Whether it is just
Absolutely.
listening to music or listening to the birds outside or whatever it may be. It may be small, but there's always something to be grateful for. So that was a perfect way to
Absolutely.
start off, Nikki. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So
No, thank you.
let's
So,
dive into your journey. So
yeah.
I'll just let you kind of figure out where it started for you.
So I'll back into my journey, starting with explaining what hats I wear today. So I would characterize myself as a researcher. I work as a research assistant professor at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. For those of you out there that don't know what osteopathic medicine is, if you've ever seen a DO, you know how if you go to the doctor, you might see MD on the name badge. Sometimes you see DO. Um, very similar credentialing process as a medical doctor, but doctors of osteopathy have a bit more of a holistic training. Osteopathy is all about really the patient in front of you and the body as an integrated system. So, my research is centered out of the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. This past year, I had the privilege to be the founding director of something called the Pathobiome Research Center. I also serve as a co-founder and executive director for something called the Alzheimer's Pathobiome Initiative, or ALZPI, spelled out ALZPI. We are looking into how infections impact human beings across the lifespan. Our main emphasis has been on brain. So we do study Alzheimer's disease, but we also study things like ALS, Parkinson's, PANDAS and PANS, and epilepsy. Our team is really a hodgepodge, if you will. It's interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. So people that are scientists, people like myself, like a patient with business experience. There are innovators that are in life sciences, developing new tests for infections as well as new technologies, and then doctors that are actually treating patients. And this global consortium approach is really about bridging silos, because as we all know that have gotten sick, people with that get sick with chronic infections like Lyme, is that the way that our care is approached can be very siloed, right? You may end up, an average Lyme patient may see more than a dozen. I saw a dozen doctors and still was misdiagnosed literally 12 times, because different systems of the body get involved at different times, right? And the symptoms may come and go, they may mimic other things. So many of us have drifted or felt like what I call a healthcare hockey puck, where they pass you from one teammate to the next. You start to feel so injured by being passed off, right? The hurt that you feel when someone says, "Ah, I can't take your case. It's too difficult." That actually hurts, I remember that pain vividly. So
I'd almost rather them say that than you're crazy or nothing's wrong with you. You know
there's
what I mean?
that.
You get a little bit of both, I guess, right?
Absolutely. No, you're right. It just when you are looking for an answer, as we all know, you want someone to invest with you and say, I'm going to stick it out with you until we figure it out. And maybe the outcome won't be perfect, but you're not alone. So my journey to do these things and to really work officially in the space, building these research collaborations to figure out how infections actually cause brain diseases and other chronic diseases in the body, like asthma. I first became a patient. So, as you said, Tanya, my children were 3 and 5. I had been a stay-at-home mom. And suddenly I went from being in pretty good health, although I did have lifelong asthma. It had previously been pretty well controlled. I was running half marathons, eating healthy, taking great care of myself. And suddenly my breathing just got horrendous, and I developed one sore joint in my hand, and I thought that was pretty bizarre. And I went to my asthma doctor, who is like an asthma and allergy specialist, and his first reaction was, okay, we're having an asthma exacerbation. So if any of the listeners out there have asthma, sometimes you get a cold or you get exposed to something, dust, molds, pets, cats, and then you have a flare up and the doctor gives you like prednisone for a few days and says, take this, do your nebulizer, we'll get this under control, no problem. So I leave with my prednisone prescription, not feeling great about it, just because I felt like the feeling I was having was more of like, I kept describing like feeling low on oxygen, a little different than my asthma had previously been. So I took the steroids and essentially things just got worse. I went from having to take 20 milligrams twice a day. That didn't work, so they increased it 40 milligrams. They increased it 80 to 80 milligrams. I developed like a rattle in my lung, went back to the doctor, and ended up having multiple chest x-rays at this point. I'm still basically all night long hungry for air. And now I know what it's called. It's called air hunger. So for those of you out there who have felt it, the way I described it was like having a belt around my rib cage that couldn't allow me to fully fill my lungs and not satisfied with my breath. And just lying in bed at night feeling like this desperate need for air was just so frightening. And none of the tricks were working, the inhalers, the nebulizer. It was just really rotten. So I kept going back to the asthma specialist till finally he enlisted a pulmonologist and then a second pulmonologist. And if this is already starting to sound familiar with some of the listeners, you know what this feels like when you're really ill, you're super sick, but the person across from you that you're counting on for help is looking and can't seem to find the answer. And so it's a fairly desperate feeling. You feel pretty out of control. So I ended up doing a little bit of my own research and I asked my asthma doctor about infections. And I thought, well, could I have something called atypical pneumonia? One of my chest x-rays showed inflammation. So he said, that's a good idea. Let me put you on a Z-Pak, azithromycin antibiotic, and see how you do. So I took a Z-Pak, and within like a day to 2 days, this air hunger thing got better. And I said to my husband and my friends, my neighbors, I said, oh my goodness, guys, I think, maybe a light at the end of the tunnel here. Um, what happened was the 10 days of the antibiotic happened. And then as soon as it wore off and was out of my system, it was back. So
Mm.
then 30 days of azithromycin, more steroids, another pulmonologist. At this point in time, I also developed an arrhythmia. So I had an echocardiogram. Um, Basically, that 30 days of antibiotic got my breathing to a point where it was like okay, but not great. And then after that happened, this was transpiring between an entire summer. I lost a whole summer to this breathing thing. That fall on Halloween, I remember my kids running around in their little Halloween costumes. I developed really bad bladder pain. I said to my husband, I think I have a UTI. But went to the doctor and they didn't find anything in my urine. They put me on an antibiotic. I still had the pain. They sent the urine out, didn't find anything with cultures, and then put another antibiotic, which helped a little, but it was really short. And then it stopped. And then I ended up having a diagnosis of a bladder pain disorder that maybe some of you listening have been told you had, called interstitial cystitis. It is ranked as one of the most painful things, one of the top 10 most painful things a person can be diagnosed with. Um, I came home from the doctor that day in full-blown panic, like fight or flight.
Right.
My anxiety, at this point I had been also, by the way, suffering from some fatigue. When I got that bladder pain diagnosis, that the trauma of hearing that I had this disease, I went home and Googled it. And the idea of being in bladder pain or urinary tract infection pain the rest of my life potentially was like enough to just, I mean, it really leveled me on top of my breathing. So I remember vividly, I was in so much pain that I wore the same sweatpants every day for months. And I used to actually go to church, but I wouldn't go in because I felt I was not in, the right frame of mind to be around other people. Like I was so in so much pain and so sad that I would just park outside and pray in my sweatpants and use
Oh
the
my
seat
gosh.
warmers in my car to like ease the pain in those regions of my body. And I started, looking up inflammation, right? I'm going, why am I so inflamed? What the heck's going on? And when I worked at Pfizer and Genentech, I had top-notch training, reading medical literature. So I started researching ways of combating inflammation naturally. And you will laugh, Tanya, I was eating raw garlic, so I smelled great.
Smell great walking around in your sweatpants.
Oh yeah,
I'm
looking,
visualizing this, Nikki.
yeah, Nike sweatpants, nice and worn out, formerly black, but they ended up looking a shade of gray, washing them and then putting back on each day. I was truly depressed, and eating curcumin, and making smoothies with as many anti-inflammatory natural products as I could. And actually, some of those strategies did help, by the way. I continued trying to exercise as much as I could, as much as I had breathing problems. I was doing yoga. I was really making an effort to like pull myself out of that. And I went for therapy, of course, to see a psychologist, which I highly recommend to anyone going through and battling chronic illness. If you can find someone that you connect with, that you can trust, if you can find friends that have the same struggles that you can share in your pain and then in your joys and your triumphs with, that's healing. Um, so at this point in time, I didn't know what group I landed in, right? So I'm just like this sick person, and my friends are going, "Oh my goodness, you're like falling apart. What the heck is going on?" So I ended up later, past the bladder, all winter long. Okay, I think I'm coming to grips with the fact that now when you have a bladder pain disorder, they tell you no caffeine, no acid. I'm like, man, I'm Italian. Caffeine and acid is my business. Like, I'm a cook. I love tomatoes. They tell you not to have, and actually, it's sort of silly because your stomach is a very acidic environment. And the thought that by eating tomatoes, somehow your urine would be more acidic is sort of ridiculous, actually, from a science perspective. But I did all those things because I was told to do that. That's what the medical community was saying at the time. They were like, you have this disorder, it's idiopathic. That's a word I hate, by the way. Can't stand the word idiopathic. It means we have no idea.
Yeah.
So when the spring came, and then around the time of my 34th birthday, I developed frightening symptoms that now brought me to my primary care doctor. She was of a similar age with young children too, and been with me through this journey, and was like, I'm really worried that you might have multiple sclerosis. So I had developed neurologic symptoms, numbness and tingling, muscle spasms, really terrible sharp shooting pain behind my left eye, like cyclical, like every certain number of seconds, like a hot poker through my back of my eye. And I'm going, I just came to grips with the bladder thing and my breathing and all these other things. And this is like, so I at this point I realize I came to this, and it sounds perhaps dramatic, but I was of the belief at the time, and I think I was right, that if I did not figure out what was wrong with me, that it could take my life. Like that it was heading in a direction that was truly dangerous, and that eating garlic and doing all of these things that were healthy that I knew, were potential strategies, were a band-aid for something that was bigger.
Yeah.
And I did this Google search, and I will always say it changed the whole rest of my life. I typed in different disease linkages between the things that I had been diagnosed with. And what I typed in was interstitial cystitis, which is the bladder pain thing, and atypical pneumonia. And I saw a study. It was small, but it was out of Vanderbilt with an infectious disease specialist whose name was Charles W. Stratton, that he did with a urology colleague of his, where they took urine from women that suffered with this terrible bladder pain thing that I was diagnosed with, and they tested their urine, but not using a regular urine test to pick up for typical bacteria. They did a urine test to pick up on bacteria that can actually go inside the building blocks of what makes us us, things that can go inside our cells and hide. I like to call them stealth pathogens or stealth bacteria. And this study was on a really weird bacteria I'd never heard of. So everyone's heard of chlamydia, the sexually transmitted chlamydia. That's called chlamydia trachomatis. This infection is called chlamydia pneumoniae. And the reason it's called pneumoniae is just a fancy way of saying it's actually a respiratory infection. So it's a respiratory cousin of the sexually transmitted infection. And I ended up seeing this study which said that 80% of the women's urine that they tested using something called PCR, which I think a lot of us became familiar with during the COVID pandemic, PCR and nasal swabbing, looks for the DNA or the building blocks of the bacteria. And 80% of the women had evidence of this chlamydia pneumoniae in their urine. And the authors said, well, we would need to do much bigger studies to clearly say, okay, this is linked, but this bacteria causes inflammation that's chronic, and you will never find it if you do a routine test. So I just was like,
Interesting.
oh my goodness. right?
Yeah. The one time Google saved you, right? Because
Yes,
Google can be good and bad, right? Like
indeed.
oftentimes we put something in Google and we think that we're dying, which a lot of times we feel like that anyways, right?
Yeah, it can
So
be
this was kind
alarming.
of your ticket was finding this research that was done. That's so interesting. And
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people have these bladder issues that are dealing with Lyme or, all the other stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, bladder pain with Lyme is common. And then I came to learn, working in research, there are other infections that can be found in urine from people that have these diagnoses. Some of these infections are unusual and they wouldn't be detected. So, the one thing I'd like to remind everyone of is whether I'm giving a talk to an audience of scientists and doctors or to patients, is that the number one cause of inflammation in the human body is always an infection. And that is medicine 101. We just, in human medicine, have forgotten it. Veterinarians are very keen when an animal develops an inflammatory condition because they can't speak, I think is part of it. Vets are very tuned into chronic infections. So, in that space, I really love reading about veterinary cases and veterinary medicine because I think human physicians can learn a lot from that domain.
Yeah.
Um, and some of the same infections affect both, non-human animals and humans alike. So, what I also learned that was wild was this Dr. Stratton on the study who did the bladder pain study also studied MS and the relationship of this bacteria to MS. And what was happening to me was I was waiting for a neurology consult to go get an MRI to see if I had lesions in my brain, which I'm sure some of you listening have had to do. I do not have lesions. I do not have MS. I did not have uh, any lesions driven by my Lyme infection yet. The neurologist I saw did say to me, well, this doesn't mean you don't have it. Some people walk around with symptoms for 10 years and then they come back to me and eventually they develop lesions. And that really hurt. And it was a little cold, the way that that was delivered. And I'm sure many of you can relate because I'm like sitting here thinking, well, we're talking about me potentially becoming disabled and we're like talking about it like it's the weather. Um,
Right.
so I decided to then Google another search that further, just gave me hope, but also kind of scared me at the same time was I looked up, well, this is a respiratory bacteria, and I've always had asthma. So I look up chlamydia pneumoniae and asthma and find hundreds of thousands of publications linking it to chronic asthma and specifically severe asthma. So I go, holy moly, what if we're wrong about a lot of autoimmune diseases? What if they're actually chronic infections, not just the immune system gone awry from a hit and run? What if it's like, your body telling you that there is a fire and all of the inhalers, all of the steroids, we're just covering it up. So I decided
Mm.
to email Dr. Charles W. Stratton thinking I could see that he was really, really pretty famous in his realm of chlamydia pneumoniae. He was a triple board certified doctor, which meant that he was certified in internal medicine, infectious diseases, and something called medical microbiology. Those are the folks that, if you're in the hospital and you get like a blood infection test or an infection test, it goes to that lab. And they look at your specimens in the hospital. He was the director of that for more than 30 years at Vanderbilt. I wrote, you know, my whole like story. It was long, right? You've all now heard it, and wasn't a short email. And I'm thinking, well, he's going to think that I'm strange and probably not respond. But within 5 minutes, I got the sweetest email back. I call him Chuck, by the way. So if I refer to him herein as Chuck,
Okay.
that's who I'm referring to, the late Dr. Charles Stratton, who we lost 4 years ago in March. He responded very quickly, which was incredible. And he did do that, by the way, for people every single day of the week. He got emails from around the world, people discovering his research on chronic infection, and he would answer. And he said, go, and he wasn't a man of many words, though. Um, Blood test. Go get a blood test. Look for chlamydia pneumoniae, IgG, and IgM. And I said, okay. Um, so I go to my primary care doctor, and the rest is history. I ended up having continued discussions with Chuck. We ended up on the phone together. He ended up becoming my doctor. I flew to Tennessee. and
Oh,
saw
wow.
him in person probably 6 months later. And he took care of me for 7 years. But during that time, I achieved remission from the majority of my symptoms. Like people with Lyme, other people, it's been a journey. It's not linear. So for all of you listening, good days, bad days, tough months, entire tough years.
Right.
Not uncommon. Whack-a-mole, I call it. One issue pops up, you bop it on the head, and then you may have another. And I think that normalizing that for all of us is also healthy and helpful. And I am
It's
so grateful.
validating, right?
It is.
It's just being validated that I know many of us get, it takes forever to get a diagnosis and then we finally get it and we're just so excited. You would have thought that we just won the lottery or something when really we've just been told we have this horrible chronic condition, but it was just being validated that somebody believes me.
So you'll find this interesting, and I want to mention this to everyone listening. So this is really important. Most of the testing we have for infections is looking at your body's response to the infection.
Yes.
So I just mentioned IgG and IgM. So these are immune responses, right? So it's not like saying, hey, I've got the criminal handcuffed in the van. It's like, nope, I found the criminal's footprints, from the mud puddle that the person stepped on the way in while they were robbing us. We've got the mud prints. Well, what if they didn't step in the mud and they ran in, stole everything and ran away? There was no evidence of it. So with infections like Lyme, you can have patients, and this is not an uncommon phenomenon, or chlamydia pneumoniae for this matter, that their antibody testing, this immune response that we're looking for, like IgG, IgM, we may not find that because the infections themselves have impact on the immune system and may not be detectable. They have ways of hiding. So when I was initially tested for Lyme, I only had one band, so not CDC positive. Okay.
Mhm.
I did have the luxury to pay for IGeneX testing, which wasn't easy because it was expensive. And I wasn't
Yes.
working at the time, and we were a single income family. My IGeneX testing picked up on additional bands. And today, just so for clarity, and I haven't had a subsequent tick bite since 2015 when this all happened to me. 11 years later, I have 7 bands.
Really?
So
Okay.
this is okay. So let's talk about this for a minute.
Yes.
So when you take an antimicrobial drug that kills Lyme, or you go on a regimen, right, targeting these bacteria, whether it can be Lyme or you're targeting Bartonella, or you're targeting things like chlamydia pneumoniae, the treatment itself by killing the pathogen tells the immune system, oop, we have this problem. And the immune system may become aware of the problem and begin making antibodies to the infection. And so, this story where patients are told, oh, your test is negative. We know that the standard testing that's available through like Quest and LabCorp for Lyme is maybe like a coin toss at best.
Yeah.
That it half of the time we'll miss it. And some of that is the testing, and some of that is the infection messing with the host response, the immune system itself. So, in my case, I had the privilege to meet this incredible person, Dr. Chuck Stratton, the late Dr. Chuck Stratton, who sent my blood to academic labs to confirm using something we call direct detection, which is, hey, we've got the criminal, they're in the van with the handcuffs on, for pathogens. And I know that I have chlamydia pneumoniae. At that time, it was detected, the presence directly of the organism that can cause asthma, that is linked with the bladder pain as well, that can cause neurological symptoms, and was also associated with multiple sclerosis and joint issues and cardiac issues. So, finding out what was happening to me, though, actually, I remember, and I want to share a sentiment that I think a lot of people can relate to, which when I learned this from Dr. Stratton, from Chuck, when I had the call with him, and he said, I might need to start going on antibiotics for years, and they might be like multiple antimicrobial drugs, like one, two, three antibiotics. I remember thinking, this is insane. Like, how can this be happening to me? Um, when I worked for Pfizer, I sold an antibiotic for drug-resistant infections. Most people have heard of MRSA, which is a drug-resistant staph skin, mostly skin, and can infect your lungs, and it's terrible. And we were always told, minimize how many antibiotics you use, right? Like we don't want to contribute to resistance. So the idea of taking these drugs like this, like scared the daylights out of me. But when Chuck explained to me the rationale, and he shared papers with me about meningitis caused by tuberculosis, how that was treated using multiple antibiotics, sometimes for 12, 24 months longer. You have to watch for relapses. He used his heart and his brain to show me as a patient that you have to weigh risks and benefits. You have to look at how sick the person is and then look at the treatment and how risky the treatment can be and make that decision with that patient and talk to that person. And he did that. So we decided based on my neurological and neuropsychiatric symptoms, which were very severe, and my quality of life, which was very limited at this point, um, to try starting taking prolonged antibiotics. And at first, he started me on two. It was azithromycin, which is commonly people know it as the Z-Pak, but taken, actually 3 times a week because the drug stays in your system a long time. You can actually give the drug for certain conditions intermittently, 3 times a week as opposed to daily. And then I started taking an antibiotic called rifampin, which some of you might be familiar with. And the incredible thing was how my breathing improved. And suddenly my asthma symptoms went away. And, I was someone who my breathing was so bad, I had almost modified my whole life around it. What I would and wouldn't do, where I could and couldn't go. My bladder pain over a course of months faded to nothing. Um, I had developed digestive problems where my food wasn't digesting properly. That corrected. And this is funny because I'm thinking the antibiotics are going to destroy my stomach, but that's not what happened to me. So my
Did
treat
you take anything to help with your gut bacteria while you were doing these antibiotics?
No, initially Dr. Stratton, he was a traditional allopathic doctor that
Okay.
was really interested in validated data, like doing things that have clinical validation. His concern with some of the probiotics at the time was that we don't always know what probiotic is best for which person because this may depend from person to person. One bacterium may be really helpful, it may not be in the next person. And the other thing was making sure that there's really rigorous quality control because if you take there had been cases where in his purview as an infectious disease specialist, people actually developed gut infections from probiotics. So he had some trepidation about that. Um, I didn't use probiotics. There are plenty of people that, use them successfully, safely. It just wasn't a part of my journey because of
Okay.
how, he treated.
Right.
Um, but I didn't have a totally easy treatment journey either, so many of you listening may be familiar with the concept of like switching antimicrobial drugs to, address the infections or, enhancing the treatment where sometimes antibiotics are added. So one of the antibiotics that got added for me called rifabutin made me incredibly sick, and I developed something called a Herxheimer reaction. And in the Lyme community, people may call that a Herx simply, and it's named after the scientist that made the discovery. Its full name is Jarisch Herxheimer. So if anyone wants to get fancy and look it up on Wikipedia and read about
Mhm.
it, but it's essentially the idea is that the Lyme bacteria, they're called spirochetes, they die, and the immune system goes, whoa, oh my goodness, what do we have here? Yuck. And it's the byproducts essentially, and I'm simplifying it, but you have a reaction to the death of the bacteria. And also, since Lyme bacteria, like this chlamydia pneumoniae, can go inside our cells, some of the cells that they are living in will die. So you actually lose some of your own immune cells, and your body just falls into sort of a slightly immunocompromised, inflamed state where you might get worse, like fevers, chills, body aches. I lost my appetite. I spent 6 weeks in bed.
Mm.
I would drive my husband was working. He had to work to support our family. I would drive my kids to preschool and kindergarten, go home, immediately get back into my bed with water. Didn't even make the time to eat because I just was so sick and I couldn't even move my body. Like I literally felt like I was going to die.
Mm.
But the great news of it is that, my doctor, it was interesting. He checked in on me, right? Because I was living in Connecticut and he was in Tennessee. So he
Right.
happened to reach out and email me. And I said, I must have gotten some sort of a flu. He goes, oh my goodness. Oh no, that's not what this is. So he did a complete blood count and actually confirmed that I had lost a lot of immune cells. And so my immune cell counts were really low. And essentially, I was experiencing this die off reaction or a herx. And he said, we have to take a pause on the treatment, let you recover. And the really incredible thing, Tanya, was, and for anyone listening, pausing the antibiotic rifabutin, which I was frankly too scared to ever go on again from how sick I got. After that, I felt better than I had in years. Clarity in my mind, my energy levels, once I recovered my immune cells, over the next 2 weeks, I just felt so much better than I had in such a long time. And to me, that was sort of like, wow, this treatment is actually doing something. And
Doing
because I
something. Yeah.
remember, just having so many doubts about pursuing something like this. It seemed really outlandish. And then,
So, Nikki,
yeah,
sorry, can we talk? I want to get your perspective on this because I hear a lot of different things from different practitioners. So, when we talk about the hercs, and a lot of times we have to discover it on our own, right? The thing that we never like to experience.
yeah.
So, what are your thoughts, whether it just be personally or outside of research or whatever it may be? Is that there is talk that when you have a herx, it's because we're killing off too many things, right? Like it's just a die, or in your case, you're saying that our immune cells are depleting, right?
Yeah, in addition
So,
to the die off of the bacteria, yeah.
okay, that versus is your detox pathways not open and properly
Hmm.
functioning, your lymphatic system. And so, really, if everything was functioning properly and you were detoxing appropriately, you really wouldn't have a Herx reaction because your body can keep up with detoxing. So I feel like it's kind of like you could be overkilling too much, right?
Hmm.
If you're killing with slower and your pathways are open, you could, maybe avoid the Herx or yeah. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second and just get your take on it.
It's a great question, and I just don't think, here's the thing, we need more research.
Yeah.
I don't think we know. I don't think we can really answer that question. I think, and I also think it's different from patient to patient. So certainly, you and I were speaking one off. We talked a little bit about the MTHFR mutation
Mm-hmm.
that some of us learn that we have. That can impact detox, as you know, can impact our ability to actually fight infections because we can be short and deficient in vitamins. The
Mm-hmm.
bioavailability of our vitamins is different. So I think, we really need better research to characterize it. And we would know if there had been a bigger investment, into studying Lyme disease and treating Lyme disease and testing for it. It's just that it's been poorly acknowledged for
Yeah.
decades. And now,
Until now,
until
it is
now,
coming out of the woodwork.
such hope. Yeah, tremendous hope. When December 15th, and I had the privilege to go to Washington, D.C., and hear Secretary Kennedy in person in the room say, the gaslighting is over. I
It's
had tears
over.
in my
You were
eyes,
there.
goosebumps. Yep.
Oh, that's amazing. No, that
Yeah.
was just a fabulous roundtable. And
Wasn't it?
that, we talk about we chat a lot in the community, right? And you always have both sides obviously. Um, but even if, and this is where I think trying to look on the bright side of things,
Yeah.
you know, some people are fearful. Let's not get our hopes up, right? He said this, but let's not get our hopes up because nothing has happened so far. But then you also have the other people who say, whether anything happens or not, we were just validated. And
Yeah.
just
So
being validated means so much to us in this community. I truly believe big things are on the horizon. I do. But it was just interesting to hear, and I love to hear that just, take something positive from it. And if all we can take from it is that we are finally validated, we're not crazy, right? Like oftentimes
absolutely.
that's all we need to just boost up that little bit of hope that we lost.
Yeah, and I subscribe to the same book club you do of optimism. And so I echo the sentiment. I had people say, "Oh, saw that you were in DC. Let's see if they actually do something about it." I'm like, I really firmly believe that we are on the right track. This is the biggest step that's ever happened. So we
Mhm.
are going to, I can speak for my research team and for all of the different groups that I'm a part of, including the iLads. I, a year ago, joined the board of the iLads Education Foundation, the sister organization to iLads that so iLads is International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. It's practitioners. So Lyme literate doctors, naturopaths, other practitioners globally, right? So global group. These are the people saving lives, and actually treating for more than 30 years the patients that the traditional medical community just doesn't know what to do with.
Right.
Maybe not because they don't want to help, but because the training hasn't been there, the guidelines haven't been there. And my research team at the Alzheimer's Pathobiome Initiative and our Pathobiome Research Center at PCOM, we are absolutely harnessing and grabbing onto the hope train and the momentum of this. And we will, there's tremendous momentum. We will have impact. And mark my words, this is a tipping point. This is a historic time, and there is no reason to be anything but excited and hopeful. And so what we are seeing, is that greater acknowledgement on a bigger scale. So, a lot of people don't realize this. The largest funder in the entire world of medical research and innovation is the United States government. And the United States National Institutes of Health spends $50 billion a year on research. And a increase in budget for studying chronic infectious or infection associated chronic illness, or IACI, as we've started to call it, is going to happen. And so, this will enable drug repurposing, right? Using medicines that are already in the toolbox for the doctor that maybe, the clinicians hadn't thought of putting somebody that had bladder pain with, Lyme disease on something like rifampin and azithromycin like I received, but maybe they would now. Things can be developed, new drugs that maybe are targeting pathogens more directly or stimulating the immune system so that we don't have damage to the microbiome. We have new diagnostics that are coming and, diagnostic companies that were already in our space, like Galaxy Diagnostics, IGeneX, others that are going to be able to advance their ideas, advance innovations that come out of incredible places like North Carolina State University with Dr. Ed Breichwert and Dr. Ricardo Maggi and Janice Bush and Emily Kinston and their whole team. And just truly the philanthropists too, like the
Mhm.
foundations that have supported Lyme and infection research for decades. We have my team, the Alzheimer's Pathobiome Initiative. The only reason that our research, and you can see our work at www.alzpialzpi.org, everything you see there is as a result of philanthropy grants from 4 foundations that have supported us to allow us to essentially build a framework where we can study how infections are driving brain diseases like Alzheimer's, how things like the Lyme bacteria can actually cause that plaque of amyloid to show up, or, for memory problems that may indeed be reversible if someone was caught early enough in the process, diagnosed properly with an infection. And that is what, me and so many others are outdoing. And there is so much reason for hope. You know,
Mm.
people are really keen on figuring out what root causes are for issues. And
Yes, yes, that is such great news to hear. And can, I, yes, everything that you just said about the hope and the research and things are going to happen. There's not a doubt in my mind. And it couldn't come at a better time
Mhm.
because for me personally, I just see all over these lives that are being lost by ALS, right? You know, we just had a big one, another, celebrity, so to say. And there's so many of these correlations that are not being talked about, right? That when you are diagnosed with ALS, which is basically what? A hopeless illness, right? There is no hope to it. Where, I've had prior guests that come to find out they have Lyme disease, right? And so now they took this hopeless illness and got well and got their life back. And so it's this research that is so needed because somebody like me, just a little old me, I mean, I can shout it from the rooftops, right? Like if you have these illnesses, please, please, please get proper testing for different pathogens that may be in your body. And they don't hear me. And so then they just take what they have and they roll with their diagnosis. And oftentimes they don't have the best ending. And so we've got to put an end to this. So I love hearing all this research stuff that is coming down the pipelines.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned ALS. You know, what we are really advocating for, Tanya, in our ALS-PI consortium and through my research center, and really, I think many of us in the community, is precision. So we can't look at every case of especially chronic diseases, particularly neurodegenerative, neuropsychiatric illnesses, complex chronic diseases that may involve multiple systems of the body and the immune system and what you're exposed to, and look at them with a narrow lens. You have to see what's going on an individual level. And so our one of our big aims of this research consortium that we established in 2023 that I lead is to develop a testing panel that can be used to rule out not just tick-borne infections, but all of the infections that have been associated with these neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric diseases. They could be applied beyond the brain too, these testing approaches. But what we know is that viruses, fungi, things like Candida albicans, which is a fungus, yeast
Mhm.
infection, parasite infections, depending on certain places people live in the world. And then, viruses and bacteria are a big one, a predominant one. And then sometimes people have what is called polymicrobial infections, which is more than one thing at once. Because human beings, we live a long lifespan, right? We pick up and are exposed to a lot along the way. So before, we can really begin determining what the root driver is of a disease, we need to not only understand the human being's genetic composition, so we call that the
Yes.
host, right? The host landscape. And then we also need to understand the things that are on board and not just infections, things like toxins, and other things that may be in the environment around the person that could be driving inflammation.
Mhm.
But in our group, we recently received a philanthropy grant over the holidays this year to study and compare 5 brain diseases to one another, looking for microbial infections with an amazing scientist. His name is Dr. Or Shemesh, and he's conducting this research at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And we will be comparing the infections that we find across these 5 brain diseases, and it includes ALS and
It's
PANDAS and
amazing.
PANS, kids that we lost to these pediatric disorders. And to me, it's about time that as a research team, we go beyond a single disease model where we're thinking about things in a vacuum in a silo. These diseases have common underpinnings. They're linked with infections, inflammation, immune responses, the protective barrier of the brain, the blood-brain barrier. So we feel that by looking at diseases that might strike at different time points, some of the diseases disproportionately target women. We don't know why. Two-thirds of Alzheimer's cases are women. We'd like to know why. We are working on it, and so we're here to tell you, we not only are we working on it, but some of the most amazing, kind people that had success in their careers and start family foundations now give away tremendous amounts of their wealth to
To do
medical
this. This
research
is
to save
amazing.
other lives. Yeah. And to date, our team has, as a result of us publishing our paper in 2023, a total of $891,000 in research grants have come to the scientists that are a part of my consortium. And so, that's something that I always share. People will say to me, Nikki, how do we contribute to what you do? Like if someone, wanted to,
Yeah,
they can always contact me. I'm all over social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, all
I
the
love it.
places via
And
our
as
website, my
as
research
always,
center.
listeners, everything that we talk about, the links, how to reach Nikki, all the information she shared is going to be listed in the description of this episode. Just wanted to throw that out there. They know it, but for the new listeners, I wanted to remind you. But yes, Nikki, I'm also glad that you brought up PANS and PANDAS.
Hmm.
I follow a handful of families just on social media that their child is going through I, calling it a nightmare would be a kind way to describe it, right? Just horrible symptoms with their child with pandas. And it truly is heartbreaking, but also we go back to, these families with ALS and MS, they almost told you that you had MS. So there are just so many of these illnesses. We need this research. So this is just music to my ears. I love it. And I love what you're doing.
And for patients listening, I'm so glad that Tanya, you brought up PANS and PANDAS. Devastating pediatric neuroimmune conditions linked with infections. PANDAS refers to strep infection, like strep throat, tonsillitis. PANS is referring to like a broader umbrella term that can involve other infections. Lyme, Bartonella, babesiosis, I believe to be a driver. Mycoplasma, fungal and mold exposure can trigger this in some kids. But basically, the immune system turns on. And so your brain is a computer. It is the most beautiful computer. And depending on what part of your brain is being either directly affected by pathogens, by infections, or the immune system is, people are very familiar with from COVID this idea of a cytokine storm.
Hmm.
This storm that is created by the immune system where the brain actually gets injured from the immune system's reaction to something that may not actually be in the brain. We don't know if pandas and pans fully, the research hasn't been done to answer the question of are there bacteria or other pathogens in the areas of the computer, of the brain, that cause the kids to suddenly wet their bed, to suddenly wake up with night terrors, to have psychosis, to have anger and rage, to have handwriting regression. I mean, these are really serious. These can be classified as encephalitis, swelling, brain swelling. So we take this really seriously. You know, I talk to patients all the time. People reach out to me because I've shared my story widely and I hear from families. And I am an empath. I, though, have really to thrive and live my life with joy and hope. I take all of that pain and I remember it when I wake up and I feel well enough to contribute. And I take a breath with my lungs that work. And I feel my bladder that it's normally there and it's not hurting. And I say, here we go. Let's do this. I wake up and I think of ways that I can connect researchers to each other, connect funders to researchers, connect with the federal government, connect with other advocacy organizations, and build bridges so that we can address those of you listening that don't feel well and or that might have a child, and we see you and we hear you. I hear you. I hear you every day. Sorry. I
Sorry.
know it's a
No,
lot.
it's
We've had a lot of people that we love touched by these things. And someone that I love just lost a loved one to ALS. And so I don't talk about these things objectively. They're not objective for me. And I know they're not objective for everyone listening. They're not for you, Tanya. And these are, as researchers, when we have our meetings, we might talk about things and speak and use terminology. And I always want to bring it back to, you know, um, it's people. When we get a blood specimen that we're going to test, we don't want one lab just to look at it. This is somebody's blood that they gave their time, their pain, their suffering. We want to do the most research that we possibly can. And that's why different universities need to work together. That's why we need to share specimens of things like
Yeah.
brains from, this project that I'm mentioning that compares the 5 diseases. This is 50 brains. These are 10 people that we lost per disease. And those families, we honor those families by doing what we're going to do. And, it's something where, our group and is global. We have more than 30 members of our team. We are pleading really with the government, the US government, the National Institutes of Health, Health and Human Services, to allocate money to infection associated chronic illness, especially brain disease. We do not need to lose the people we're losing. There are lives we can save now.
Yes.
So,
No, it is. And I apologize. I normally can control my emotions, but it just sometimes there's just an overwhelming amount of people that just, are finally being seen. And it's hard. It's heartbreaking. And,
it
you
really,
had a scary journey. I had a scary journey. Our journeys can look very different, right? But the end result is we are suffering. We need to be heard. We need to be seen. We need to be validated and we need to be helped. And
absolutely.
so I love what you said because that is happening, right? Not every family is going to get to see this, but in memory of so many that, have left this world too early because we didn't have the resources. We're getting there, right? It's the phrase
We
of
are.
better late than never. I know, and that may sound harsh, but it is the reality. But we are getting there. We can't lose hope. We have to keep finding a way to push on and fight
We
through it.
sure do. We sure do. And we have, great reason for hope. And, it is emotional. And actually, I think we need to stay that way. We need to stay in that emotional place where we care deeply and are deeply connected. Those of us working in research and in the advancement and innovation realm, we have to stay deeply connected. We have to talk to patients and talk to one another and share these different journeys. And maybe you'll say the same thing, but my whole worldview is different now. If somebody's short with me in a coffee shop, I think maybe they hurt, or maybe they're neurodivergent,
You
or
don't know what they're going through.
yeah,
Absolutely.
maybe
It,
their baby is sick and didn't sleep last night because they have PANS. And so
yes.
we
We
together,
need more kindness in this world.
we
And,
do.
there were many blessings that I walked away from going through this journey. And I'm sure that you can say the same. And even if it's as simple as that, right? Like we have already being an empathetic person, but don't take it to heart, when the grocery store clerk is not a kind person, right? There's a reason. Don't judge. And I think that people that go through health challenges like we have, it really just changes our perspective on so much, which is truly a blessing.
And I wanted to share really briefly, a few resources for patients. Um, ILADS, I mentioned it earlier, the International Lyme and Associated Diseases website, www.ilads.org, has a provider search tool, which tells you, based on where you live, you can search up a doctor. ILADS offers fantastic training based on the evidence that is possessed today on how to treat and diagnose these infections and also other issues related. They're not just looking at Lyme. Also, MAPS, the MAPS organization of clinicians is another provider group, practitioners that really specialize in neurodevelopmental disabilities, autism, PANDAS, PANS. It's a pediatric society. That's a phenomenal reference. And a lot of the MAPS members are cross-pollinating with ILADS and learning from one another. We have members of our group, like the amazing Dr. Nancy O'Hara is part of the ILADS board as
Yes,
well.
I'm seeing a lot of crossing over and collaboration,
And it's
and it's
beautiful.
truly what we need.
It is. And, there are always resources out there. And I will leave with one really final piece of advice. If you're a patient and you have someone across from you, I don't care if they have a white coat and degrees and fancy credentials, you don't feel seen, heard, or comfortable, just find someone else. Don't expose yourself to that trauma any longer. Continue to look for someone that sees you, and you will find that person. I can tell you that. It may take some time and some patience, and allow yourself to heal, and take a moment from the trauma of it. But and I say that just fully knowing, even as a researcher that I publish, I still get scared when I go to a new doctor and I have to tell them my history. I get sweaty, I get nervous because I never know if I'm going to encounter somebody that is going to gaslight me, or they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you went through this." And you just don't know.
Nope,
But
you don't know.
I have to remind myself that every new opportunity to meet someone is a chance to share something that maybe they learned from. And so I try to put on my brave face and share my journey, even though sometimes I may not be in the mood to. And I also wanted to add that I learned, speaking of how this journey evolves over time, I only recently learned I have Babesia infection. So that air hunger that I had initially, and I forgot to mention, I also had rib pain. If anyone is experiencing air hunger, which is a very different symptom than asthma, asthma is like
Mhm.
wheezing and tightness. Air hunger is like, I can't get enough oxygen. Please get testing for Babesia. It is a
Yes.
little red blood cell parasite that can impact your ability to basically have oxygen. And so I am embarking on a new wave of my own treatment thanks to testing as a part of a study that I'm a part of. I learned that I have this infection. It previously was missed. So what I'll say is like there's always this continuous learning even with your own journey.
Yes, 100%. I love that. And that was a perfect way to do it. And I'm so thankful that you said it doesn't matter if they wear a white jacket. It doesn't matter if they have these fancy credentials on the wall. If you are not, if you don't feel that you're resonating with a practitioner for whatever reason, you don't even need to have a reason, right? But if you don't, it's truly going to inhibit your healing if you stay with that practitioner. You need to find someone that you feel comfortable with, that you feel that you can ask questions, and just everything that you just said, Nikki. It is such an important piece to finding someone that can truly help you get well.
Yeah, there's a quote that I love that I'm a saver of quotes, things that motivate me, things that speak to me. And it's that people begin to heal the moment they feel seen and heard. And that was
Yes.
true for me. Like when I met Chuck, he saw me, he heard me, and he showed me his love by not only being my doctor for the 7 years that I had him on Earth, but also becoming my mentor and my friend, and one of the first members of my research group. I always like to thank Chuck every time I still speak with him, but he's just in another realm. But his soul and his love and how giving and how humble he was, I'll always carry with me. And I'm so
I love
thankful to
that.
have met you, Tanya, and for you sharing your journey, which I know takes a level of vulnerability, and it's not easy. So it is beautiful and wonderful to connect with you today.
I so appreciate you, Nikki. Thank you so much.
Thank you.